All right, so welcome. My name is Lauren Bagel. I'm the president of the Chicago chapter of Cornet Global, and I work with All Steel and Gunlock. Welcome to this exciting conversation, our broker roundtable, like part 2. We're bringing back a lot of the veterans from our conversation almost a year ago. I think you're all very familiar with the Zoom platform. We don't have that slide up anymore, but we do record these sessions, so I just want to make a note of that. We always recommend speaker view so you can see the folks that are actually chatting, and you can make that selection in the upper right-hand corner, I believe. Next up, I think we've got our sponsor slide. Yep, there we go. It is because of them that we can do what we do throughout the year. So thank you to our incredible sponsors, those of 2020 and those in 2021. Still time to sponsor if you're interested, just reach out to someone you know on the board. And I think up next, we've got our list of everything coming down the road, covering the industrial market in March, another tour coming up, but we're going to save those details for another time. Our golf outing, we already have that date. So we were just talking about in-person events, September 16th. We are solidified back at Cantini, and we're excited about that. And then there will be that global summit, which currently is slated to be in person. So that's pretty exciting. So before I dig in here, I just wanted to take a minute. I know everyone on the panel and several of you in the audience likely heard about the unexpected passing of Audrey Elrod-Lakin. She was truly the life of the party, and she spearheaded so many special events for the real estate world, and she's going to be missed. So on a lighter note, but certainly digging into events that we love, I'm excited to hear from this crowd. Hopefully they're going to tell us how things are looking incredibly bright. Wink, wink. And on that note, I'm going to turn it over to Bob Bruno, Senior Vice President with Pepper Construction, who is going to introduce himself and this esteemed panel. So thank you.
Thank you, Lauren. And thank you, Cornet, for the invitation to moderate this panel. Again, I'm Bob Bruno, and I've been with Pepper Construction for over 25 years. I lead our workplace interiors practice. Today, we have a group of Chicagoland's very top commercial real estate executives with us. And let's start off by having each introduce themselves, beginning with Steve.
Hey, thanks, Bob. And it's great to be with friends in our real estate world, even though we're not together. It's great to connect at least face to face. And if anybody's tired of Zooms or Teams or WebExes, raise their hand, just so you know. But given that we are where we are, Steve Stratton, I've been in the Chicago real estate market, since 1973. So that doesn't say too much. I was 3 years old, but I have certainly a lot of experience, a lot with the panel here in various activities. Right now I chair our JLL's headquarters practice, which is a national enterprise of our team. So happy to be here and provide insights at Chicago and a national level.
How about Lisa next?
Hi. All right. Thank you, Bob. I'm Lisa Konieczka, and I am a executive vice president at CBRE. I've been focused in the occupier practice since starting in the business, and a little bit later, but I also started when I was 3, but I started in the business in 1988. So I'm one of those rare birds who's never quit her job. I started at Rubloff, which got acquired by Cole, which got acquired by CB. So I'm thus far a lifer for the organization. I also focus in the Chicago market as well as outside this market, but definitely spend most of my time talking with HQs and talking with clients as they're figuring out how to return to office in this new world that we have. So I'm happy to be here.
Thank you. Michael?
Thanks, Bob. I'm really excited to be on this panel with everybody, and really appreciate the invite. Michael Klein, I guess I've been in the business around the same time. I got into it about the same time Lisa did in the late 80s. Glenstar Properties, we're based here in Chicago. We have an office in Dallas. I'm the managing principal. We're an owner and developer, an investor between Chicago and Dallas. We have about 9 million feet, about 6 million here in Chicago and about 3 million in Dallas. So it's been a very, obviously for all of us, very interesting year, and I'm just excited to be with everybody today. Thanks.
Thank you. And last but not least, Drew.
Oh, Bob, thanks for that. So I'm Drew Nieman, and I'm an executive vice president and partner in Riverside Investment and Development, which is a long name for a group of guys that I used to work with at John Buck for over 30 to 35 years. I was an architect for the first 6 years of my career, but my lifestyle required more money. And so I had met a few brokers and they said, boy, you'd be good in real estate. So I met John Buck, and the rest is history, and worked with him for almost 30 or about 25 years. And then I've worked with CB and US Equities, and ended up finally with Riverside with John O'Donnell, who he's been my client for the last 8 or 10 years anyway. So finally joined forces, and it's great, kind of overseeing the landlord side of things. So very excited to be here with my compatriots. Stratton and I almost grew up together, I think, in real estate. And that'll be another video, or not a video, but a panel later, a much smaller one and very discreet. We'll talk about how real estate was in the old days. But let's get going today and see if we can find a bright light in this cloud.
Sounds good. Thanks, Drew. So we have about 50 minutes for the panelists to cover a number of topics, and we're going to leave some time at the end for Q&A. So please submit your questions via the chat feature at the bottom of your page in Zoom. And you can send them at whatever point in the program you'd like. So I know I'm excited, as I'm sure each of you are, to hear these panelists weigh in on the market and what the future looks like, so we can take away some new information to think about with our clients. And let's get started. As you all know, COVID hit us really hard last March. For all intents, shut the market down. We went from 100 miles an hour to 0 overnight. This panel convened 7 months ago and spoke about where we were then and predicted where we would be in the future. So the first question is to each of the panelists. Looking back over the last 12 months, what is the most dramatic change that you witnessed? And let's start with Lisa on this.
Sure. Thanks, Bob. I think, if I think about the last 12 months, or let's say the last 11 months, because 12 months ago, we were all still relatively blissfully thinking this was just something that we were going to have to deal with for a short period of time. But certainly, if we look at what's happened and the impact of COVID, obviously, it was for the real estate market, it was a complete stop. But what we've seen is that before that stop, there was a lot of thought around workplace strategy, around how people work and thinking about things differently. There were amenities being delivered in buildings that were sort of creating collaborative environments, co-working, and all the cool things that happened by bringing people together was really, really vibrant. And you know what, that part, it stopped and we can't be together, but the focus on that has not changed. And I think that that is something that we're going to see going forward. So it's a dramatic change in that nobody thinks everything's going to be the same, but I do believe that this idea about collaboration and focus on bringing employees together to innovate has become all the more important. And for those companies that really never thought that way, or didn't feel the opportunity because they had a lease expiring or because it just wasn't perceived to be part of that culture, they're now on board. And so that has become really the focus, is how do we create environments, regardless of size, scale, type of industry, that will cause people to collaborate. Whereas I think before, those were the tech companies doing that. Some of the progressive companies are doing that. We're kind of getting there, but let's be a little bit more cautious. Do we want to go to a universal office size as a law firm, or do we really want to still kind of keep two size law offices? Those were the kinds of questions that were being asked. And I think everybody was just kind of pushed pretty hard to have to jump right in the middle of this workplace strategy world to figure out how to create that return to office environment that is going to give your employees confidence to return to the office, and the driver to say that that is preferable over working from home because I can innovate and get something better out of the office.
Maybe to throw an idea on top of that is, I think to your point, Lisa, we had talked about the future of work, and that was kind of a well-used, if not overused, buzzword. We also talked about the art of possible. And I think it's now the future of the individual at work, right, versus work as a defined term. And it's not the art of possible, it's really the art of practical. And what is the art of doable? And I think back 7 months ago, if you were to talk to, and we've a number of probably common relationships at the CEO level, everybody was saying the office is the baseline of the culture. Well, we're going to be a back to work environment. That same group today says, we're going to be a mobile work environment. We're going to have people working at home. We're going to have people working in the office part-time and not part-time. And I think so. So the last thing I would say, after having been through, I think this is my 7th or 8th recession, is be flexible, be nimble, be on your feet, because you just don't know what that next horizon is going to look like. And I think that the other thing that we didn't know in May is what the political environment might be that's going to impact a lot of what we're thinking about. And in Chicago, some of that political activity is what is really happening in some of our gateway markets in New York or Chicago or San Francisco. And I think my sense is Chicago is to remain a stable anchor in the gateway city environment. But I think we have work to do to support the community in that and support the city and be a positive contributor to that in a positive environment. And I think that's just an attitude I think we should have going forward. And I think the other piece of that is we should help our clients provide flexibility in their next brick and mortar footprint, Lisa, right? So that they can kind of comfortably commit to be back in on some basis, but that it's flexible, so the worker, who's still the most important employee, is going to have a place to go and be flexible, and get our people back downtown Chicago to support the infrastructure at a retail level and elsewhere.
Amen. Here's what I'll take. Personally, over the last 12 months, just, let's go right to, it's about me, is I'm a people person. And a lot of us are, and I'm used to dealing face to face, whether it's presentations or tours through our buildings. And that's how, I think is the most effective selling, which is what I do. And I know Michael does, in trying to lure tenants to our buildings and our product. So, Lisa and Steve consult tenants looking for office space. So they can roll with the punches, they can work, they talk about flexibility, and they're waiting to kind of get direction as well as help give direction. While Michael and I have physical products, we have buildings. We're either going to be building a building or we've got one that exists. And we're waiting to say, do you know enough yet, whether that's Steve and Lisa and their clients, for us to be able to respond, alter, change? We're fine, don't change anything. We just want you back in the office. And that's a tougher question to answer and a response, because if you're not used to sitting still, if you're not used to not doing something, what can we do when you get an article today that comes out in the Wall Street Journal says a possible another remote work year looms as reopenings delayed? And we're sitting there with buildings that are either physically ready to receive people or we're going to develop them. So that's what makes it a little more challenging on our side of the equation is, do we go ahead and try to answer questions for our prospective tenants or our clients and our tenants and deliver a physical representation of whatever that is and hope you got it right? And then not know for another year if you did or you didn't, or do you leave yourself flexibility? So these are things that are, that are keeping me up thinking about. And obviously, the more flexible we can be in terms of delivering space to tenants or having tenants decide how big they are or how small they are.
Yeah, Drew, I would tell you, there's no hope in decision making. Clients who are P&L sensitive and that don't make decisions on hope. So I think it's a supply and demand issue. Demand is the number of seats that drive the amount of square footage. You and Michael have to help us figure out what is that flex point for the next 3 or 4 years that allows them to make a commitment and still be flexible in that supply side.
Yep, right.
And if we can't do that, we're going to be sitting here 7 months from now saying, well, absorption was the worst last year in downtown Chicago since 2012. There were 34 leases done in the fourth quarter. 34 leases in the fourth quarter in Chicago. So we don't want to do that. So we have to provide this vision for flexibility and work with you to, maybe that's a concession trade that is not just free rent and TIs, it's flexibility, you know, as a part of that concession package, or it's on top of TIs and on top of abatement because the market's soft and you should give us more.
I know, he's already asking for shit, Michael.
I know.
can't believe it.
No, you know, it's been an interesting, to Lisa's point, 11 months. And, you know, I remember when we talked 7 or 8 months ago, 9 months ago, there were companies that were saying, we may never come back to the office, or we may have half our workforce working remotely. And what's been interesting over the last, call it 5 months, 4 months, is it feels like that's changing. We're hearing it from our tenants. I'm sure, Lisa, you and Steve are hearing it from your clients. People want to be back in the office. I have a 25-year-old who works for Google, and he cannot wait to get back in the office, as do all of his associates. Same thing. The last thing they want to do is be in a 700 square foot apartment working. So, you know, I think it's one of those things that 12 months ago, we had no idea that we were going to shut down. And I think if we fast forward 18 months from now, it's going to look different than we probably think it is today. Some of the things that have been interesting, kind of, again, personally, and what we're seeing is about 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago, we created this program at our properties called Glenstar Connect. And it's really simple. It was about building a community at each of our properties. Tenants wanted to get to know each other. And it was everything from, you know, socially related stuff to book clubs to educational. And so we obviously shut that down in March, nothing. And about 3 or 4 months ago, maybe 4.5 months ago, we started getting emails from our tenants saying, can we do this virtually? We miss our friends. Now, we've done it virtually, and that's been great. But it was interesting to us that there was a demand to want to be together. And even though we're doing it virtually and nobody's crazy about it, they're doing it. We have amazing participation virtually. There's that feeling that people want to get back together. And like you, Drew, and you, Steve, and you, Lisa, and I'm guessing most people on this call, being at the office feels good. I know, Drew, you've been back, and I've been back I'm 3 days, 4 days a week, and it just feels better. And like you, I had a tour the other day, felt great. So I think that we're clearly, given the timetable, the rollout of the vaccine, we're not going to know in 3 or 4 months, right? It just doesn't feel that way. But I think if we fast forward a year to year and a half from now, I think we'll know more. And to Steve's point, one of the things that we started doing about 4 months ago, 5 months ago, is in all of our properties, we currently have spec suites. We're building out more and bigger. And we're saying, look, come for 6 months, come for a year. We know you're not ready to make a decision, or we believe you're not. And so if you're not ready to make a decision, we're happy to have you short term, because we know a lot of people aren't ready to make that long-term commitment. And that's going to be something, Drew, you and I, we're going to have to deal with probably the next year or two as everybody figures this out.
Now, Steve, you know, Steve's right about, you know, pre-com, expansion, contraction, you know, all those kind of things. It'll just be different elements of the deal that will have to be changed and be more flexible. I agree.
Hey guys, this is Tony from Pepper. Bob got bounced off the internet. He's logging back in. But as a true number 2 man at second fiddle, I thought I'd just keep up with the questioning as we roll along. Is that all right?
Sure. Sounds
Okay,
great,
cool.
Tony.
Steve kind of touched on it, but I'm wondering if maybe you all could just kind of grab a few stats in the market. I guess what I'm looking for is the up arrow, down arrow, side to side arrow, on the general trends in the market: vacancy, absorption, rental rates. Maybe you could break it down by A or B or suburbs or downtown. Can you give us a quick primer in that regard?
You know what, I'll start a little bit on downtown, and then certainly we can kind of roll from there. But I think that, you know, so I'd say, you know, vacancy arrow up, all other arrows, concession arrow up, all other arrows kind of down.
There you go, Drew.
No. So I forget supply. So vacancy, supply, and concessions up. Everything else kind of going down. Sorry, Drew and Michael. But
Yeah, no, it sounds
no,
like a
but,
rep.
I think you're right. I think the other piece of that is face rents are narrowly down, because I think people want to retain that value prop on an exit. And I think the other piece of this kind of is that credit remains king. Single tenant leases there's only like 5 or 6 major office investment sales last year downtown. 3 were in Fulton and Lincoln Yards, single tenant net lease deals. The other 2 were downtown, 333 Wabash and 225 Wacker. But so you've got arrows pointing up on vacancy, sideways face rent, down on the concession kind of world, but up, triple on credit. And I think that ties to a lot of the financing exposures that landlords have because of the capital markets activity in 16, 17, and 18, where a lot of them did 5-year bullet notes, right? Either CMBS or direct debt or whatever. So there's a lot of refinancings coming up, and that ability to kind of capture that credit as part of that underwriting is going to be really essential because of the other downward pressure that we're seeing in the rest of the marketplace. And Drew, I'd love to have your thinking on that, but that's kind of my sense of what's a little bit of an non-traditional measure of the market.
That's great, Drew.
It's, what's interesting when there isn't a lot of activity, it's hard to believe in numbers or look at things. The things that I do know is the sublease market sure has grown, right, in a vast way. And I think the number, everybody's kind of playing with is somewhere in the 5 million plus square foot additional, probably in the last 12 months, it's, hit the market. And it's all different sizes and shapes. And apparently 40% in the West Loop. The highest industry is tech that has put it on. It's almost 40% of the sublease increases in the tech arena, which tech was the group that was helping to bail us out, a couple of years ago. So it's interesting how it ebbs and flows. But I think you're right, Steve. I think the rates are kind of just sitting as they are rates. It's now discussions on, TI's abatement, getting in, but also being creative on the, as I talked about, if they said, look, the lease doesn't start for 18 months, we will give them longer than we ever would of a runway to determine what their actual size would be and give them that flexibility, so that at least that's one hurdle that maybe we could get out of the way, and they could get them comfortable to try to move forward and make a decision. We've just had a flurry of RFPs, which is exciting, on deals, probably 6 or 7 deals that are, let's call it all above 100,000. Now, how long they take to gestate, God knows. Unless they have a date, whether it's a termination date notice or it's a natural expiration date notice, people, I think, will move slower today and more thoughtful, as they should, than what we're used to. Michael?
I would ask Lisa this, maybe Lisa, because if not concessions and abatement, it's space give back, right? So that's a big part of anybody looking at kind of resetting leases that are existing or even maybe new ones. Where do you see the P&L implications of this? I think that is kind of one of those secret nuggets that we all have to deal with on the occupier side that most of the landlords don't know about. No offense, but it's just something that we deal with every day, right?
It is. And I think that's where people can get a little bit misguided in thinking about whether it's terminations or givebacks. I believe that on a P&L basis, in the event that you partially give back space, and if there's a termination penalty that you have to pay, you have to actually amortize that over the remaining term of the existing lease. And so what you really have to do is actually kind of analyze this both from a landlord and tenant sort of point of indifference. If you're going to start looking at restructuring a lease, to make sure that there is that balance between what is the cash benefit, that may be something that companies are still very focused on in today's dollars, and what actually the long-term P&L implications are. I think all of us have been in the industry long enough to see that oftentimes in down markets, people start to borrow from the future, right? And start to restructure and sort of, to a certain extent, kind of kick the can down the road. And I think that's a place where folks need to be very thoughtful in making decisions quickly, because there may be a lot of flexibility. And the last thing you want to do is kind of go through a bunch of restructuring around your lease, maybe some downsize, maybe some termination, and then have that not have the right P&L impact for what happens 18, 24 months from now. And I think we are going to see that it's going to be different. We talk a lot about how we all want to get back to work and we want to be back in this environment. And then there are other companies that talk about how they really see that their employees are so productive right now that they could be virtual forever, right? They're very, very productive. But you have to remember one critical component is we don't have choice right now, right? Our choice is to be at home, or in general, to be in a place where we are socially distanced and we are being safe. And so there's a lot more propensity probably to work. I think probably everyone on this call is saying, my God, I've never worked so hard as I have over the last 11 or 12 months, because there's just not much else to do, right? You can't leave and go, I mean, especially for us in Chicago in the wintertime, it's not like we can go out and play golf, right? So you end up just working. And as soon as life starts to return to normal and you have all of these mobile employees, the question is will they stay as dedicated, as focused in the office, or will you start to see that the choices that are offered maybe start to compromise productivity? So I would hate to see a company swing the pendulum. We know all pendulums, when they swing too far, it's probably not a good thing, but if they swing it really, really far and focus on this mobility sort of approach, and then all of a sudden they need to retract. And then, as you said, Steve, there's a lot of financial implications that go along with that. I think that we can be comfortable that there will be some availabilities, but certainly there's the P&L impact that comes from it. There's probably one other thing that I do want to mention. Drew mentioned and then Michael, get this to you too, to talk maybe about the suburbs as well, is 5.3 million square feet of sublease space on the market, a 92% increase since January of 2020. It's a lot of sublease space. And then you look at also the fact that we were in a very active development cycle. Beautiful properties. Certainly Drew his team is part of building a lot of new buildings. There were buildings that were built speculatively in Fulton Market. So we have this combination of a lot of new construction and a lot of sublease space and a market that has nominal activity. But what's interesting is if you actually look, and I'm sure Drew knows these numbers perfectly, when you actually look at, say, in the Class A space or the trophy space, at large blocks of space that are available in existing second generation buildings, there aren't very many. I mean, certainly if you look at the class, and so it's an interesting dynamic that you kind of look at for those tenants that are larger, that are going to look into the market. There's a lot of new construction and all of the benefits that go with that, but there isn't a lot of opportunity to look at second generation space and potentially to take advantage of existing conditions or existing infrastructure that might help to maybe squeeze capital a little bit. So while you talk about all of the space that's available, there's kind of this one little sector where there isn't quite as much space. So
that's why they hire you, Lisa.
Yeah.
That is why they hire me.
And Steve.
So Nebo, think about this. Think about, B of A and BMO are moving out of a full block in Central Loop. They're vacating B minus C plus space, right, Lisa? That's exactly your point. The law firms are moving from Class A, but not trophy space for the most part. I mean, Perkins, others are moving from good solid buildings, but they're not big chunks of space. So I think we're speaking to some of those anchors. Salesforce is kind of in a smattering of buildings. So you don't have this kind of big block of vacancy to backfill, exactly to your point. There's not a 200,000 foot block of really great space, so to speak, that's available. So what do? You kick the can, or you try to find a way for Drew to cut his rent to $20 or something.
Either way, it's called Drew.
So I got dropped for a minute. Apologies.
Really?
I'm in the Drew Nieman face-to-face camp, by the way. So I want to get rid of all this. But anyway, let's go to Michael and ask Michael for his take on the suburban sublease market.
Yeah, no, the suburban sublease market, there's a handful of larger subleases that are either officially on the market or there's a few that are quietly on the market. And what we're seeing so far is, at least, it's not as much, it doesn't feel like as much as downtown. I think to Lisa's point, there's maybe one building that you would call Class A that's sort of, again, not formally, but informally on the market. Beyond that, there's really not. And so, we had a big tour the other day. It was a 100,000 foot tour, and we're probably one of two or three buildings. And the sublease building that was in play is not in play. They want more flexibility. They want signage. They want things that they're not in this sublease scenario. They're just not going to get. The other thing that we're seeing a lot of in the suburbs, and again, it's all relative because there's not, tons and tons of deals, but we've had, 100,000 foot tour. We have another 60,000 foot tour coming up. For them, it's about out-of-pocket cash today. They're looking for turnkey solutions. They don't want to come out of pocket today. They want to keep their dollars and their capital focused on their business. So that's what we've been providing. I mean, every tenant that we're seeing today, I don't care whether they're 1,500 feet or this 100,000 foot deal, we're saying we'll provide you a turnkey solution. and that's getting them really excited. So I think you're going to see more of that than we probably saw clearly pre-pandemic, at least in the suburbs. But it's still, again, it's still fairly early, and hopefully over the next 3 to 6 months, we see more activity, which I think will help us out. But I think the suburbs are the same way. The B and C buildings, even sort of pre-COVID, weren't getting a lot of activity. So you'd see in a certain submarket, wow, there's 20% availability, and you're a 75,000 foot tenant, and you want Class A space, and you want to keep your employees happy. There just wasn't a lot out there. I mean, the O'Hare market has been probably the tightest submarket, including downtown, prior to COVID for a year and a half. The Class A space that we were competing with was 4 to 6% vacant. And so, we saw rents at one of our properties out of President's Plaza go from 18 net to the last deal we had done was 27 net. And that happened in like a 14-month period. So why there was space in O'Hare, if you wanted to be in a B minus C plus building, there was some space for you. If you were 25 or 50 or 75,000 feet and you wanted to be in A space, nobody really had it. So I think there's going to be more of that as we go forward, both downtown and the suburbs, where the better buildings like, the stuff you guys have, Drew, that you're building, that's the stuff that's going to do well. Or people that are really putting money into a building and taking what was a B building and really making it an A building, not a, little better than a B building was before. It feels like that trend is going to continue.
Michael, quick question. So, have you seen, I think a lot of people in the press talks a lot about this idea that there's going to be a migration, just as there has been residentially for office space in the suburbs or satellite offices. Have you seen any of that happening?
Small. We've had 3 showings out at O'Hare, but again, 3,500 feet to 7,000 feet. We did 2 deals up in Bannockburn. Again, small law firms, leases expiring. One was 3,500 feet. The other was 5,500 feet. We haven't seen any large requirements. Now we've seen some large requirements that we're considering downtown that we're going to take, like, we're going to keep a floor in your building, but our other floor, we're going to move downtown. And they've come back to us and said, can you give us a proposal if we keep it all out here? So I don't know if that was COVID related or more people that were going to move downtown ended up moving to the burbs. It's still early for that, but we haven't seen this mass migration. And it goes back to, I think, what level you're trying to recruit, right? Most of the people that moved to the burbs were at the younger side, maybe 28 to 30, and on the older side, obviously older. But I look at my 25-year-old and, he lives in the city. And if I said, hey, how about coming up to like Northbrook or Glenview and renting an apartment, he would look at me like I'm crazy. So I think if you're recruiting that kind of talent at some level, you're going to have a presence downtown, whether you set up a satellite in the burbs for some of your employees. And that could happen if rather than, coming into the office 3 days a week or 2 days a week or 4, somebody may decide to set up a satellite office. But I think, Lisa, to your point, it's still really early and that really hasn't happened yet.
Yeah, no, I haven't seen that either.
I'm hearing a lot of tenants are kicking the can down the road, renewing for the short term. What does that mean for the market?
I want to throw one out, Bob, to kind of supplement that one, and that's the state of Illinois, right? So you look at the governments who are probably the biggest user in downtown Chicago. They're going through their own right sizing right now, right? State of Illinois committed to buy the 555 building owned by Principal to move most of their workforce into 430,000 feet. Bought the building for 170 a foot, plus another whatever for TIs. So I think there's some kind of unique buyers out there or tenants that are prepared to commit if they can find that one-time solution. But it's got to be a special square peg, square hole. My sense, and I'll turn it over to others, is 75% are either kicking the can or making short-term decisions or making no decisions. And because it's safe, because they don't know, and as opposed to a hope, they need to have more refinement around their back to work reentry strategies, and some are going through labor decisions about maybe moving to the not gateway markets, but maybe down to Atlanta, Dallas, where we've seen a lot of movement out of California, not necessarily tied to Chicago, but there's some big decisions being made out there. And I think it's as much a strategic as it is a kind of a real estate play, for sure.
Michael, did you say, Michael, you do work down in Dallas, right, or Texas?
Yep, Dallas.
And, Bob, I think we were talking before on the prep panel about, Chicago's occupancy, meaning people that actually have shown up at their office like Michael and I have, is probably around 9%, 8 or 9% of the major buildings, and obviously I've got 3 of them we know really good data on. And what did you say Dallas was? 25, 30?
Dallas on the low end, depending on the building, our buildings are between about 30 or 35% on the low end till we have one building at 60%. And it feels, when I say normal, it's not normal in that everybody's doing the right thing. So it's not like the Wild West, people go, oh, it's Texas. People are, taking their masks off and doing whatever, if you go down, you'll see all of our buildings, everybody's wearing masks. People are socially distancing. Now, it's easier, and Steve, I think, brought this up in our pre-call. It's easier when it's more of a suburban market as a whole. Downtown Dallas is really kind of uptown and it's not that big. So most of the buildings are anywhere from 3 or 4 stories to 12 stories. So you don't have elevating issues. People are driving into the office. They're not using mass transit, right? But they're back. So the level of activity is back. And we are seeing in Dallas, unlike Chicago, and it totally makes sense, companies that aren't national and they're more regional or local, they're willing to commit because they sort of know what it's like. Their people are back. It's easier, right? In Chicago, I think, Steve and Lisa, to your point, I think, Bob, you brought it up. I think if they can kick the can today, they will. There's a few companies. One of the tours we had is a company that's growing. Their people are generally back in the office. And so they feel like they can make a commitment. That's, at least from our perspective, that's a huge anomaly. I mean, we're seeing much more, hey, can we just stay for a year, right? Like, can we just do a year and then we'll figure it out?
Yeah, but I think, Michael, part of that, and I agree that the decision-making time periods are extending, but I do see that for tenants that have either termination options or lease expirations, things that are coming up in the near to medium term future, that 4 months ago, they were, let's just see how this all goes. Whereas now I think that companies are starting to be prudent about being more deliberate about strategy and planning and thinking about the what ifs that go around each of the different types of scenarios where they might return to work. As Drew has said, it's going to be fluid, and even fortunately, because I think landlords are going to come to the table with this, it's going to be fluid until the point of actually, putting the last hammer out there, right? So that you'll be able to kind of flex about how much space it is that you need. But they're coming up with strategies, because I think that the companies that have termination options or have lease expirations have got this other unique opportunity, which is they can rework their space to make it what they need it to be to attract their employees back, if that's their goal and objective, right? So instead of saying, hey, employees, come on back, there is lots of plexiglass and hand sanitizer, right? That's not necessarily, that's good, and that's something we have to do. But if we can create an environment that says, I'm going to have you work a 3-2 or a 2-3, and I'm going to have you come back in, and I'm going to have this collaborative space where you can come and really be productive when you're in the office. If tenants have the opportunity to be able to do that because of a natural lease expiration or an option, that becomes a great opportunity. You don't have to put a pin in it today, but hopefully you have a runway now where you can start to make some plans over the coming 6 to 9 months in order to be ready to react. So then you do get to do 2 things. You get to kind of satisfy sort of what you need to do in order to attract your employees back to the office, but you get to do the other piece of this, which is to take advantage of all of the benefits that are coming from the marketplace. And so that's kind of the blend. You don't have, timing a market is not something that we necessarily, any of us would recommend. It's just like, if you could do that with a stock, that'd be great too, right? So you can't time the market perfectly, but what you can do is understand trends. And if they can fit in and weave into the strategy that you're starting to build, and the driver of the build is to get your employees back being innovative and collaborative and productive, then I think that becomes a really great place to start thinking, right? Not necessarily starting to act, but they're starting to think. And I would imagine a lot of the people that are on this call today are building some strategies, talking to their HR and people organizations a lot more, thinking about sort of trends, when our people are going to be confident to come back to the office. And hopefully that's something that will continue to extend as people gain more confidence in the vaccine process and feeling healthy.
Yeah, I think part of the driver as well that I think we on the tenant side have said that, the market has taken a hit. The NERs, net effective returns, are lower, face rates are up, concessions are down. This is unlike 12 months ago or prior. There are better deals to be had today. And I think my perspective is that may kind of continue for longer than we think, in part for a couple of reasons. One, we just delivered almost 3 million feet of new last year. Or this year we're delivering. There's another 4 million in the pipeline, half pre-leased, 40% pre-leased. Potential shrinkage in that kind of pre-leasing square footage. Co-working, flex space had been a big part of our demand side, right? That had taken for 5 years, almost 10 million feet in Chicago. We don't see that coming back. So I'm a little concerned for the viability of the market. And that's for tenants too, that we're not going to see that bounce back. And in part because Chicago may not be the receiver city that we had been for the previous 10 years, where we had about 1 million feet a year of inbound deals from the suburbs and outlying markets. So I don't want to be a negative prognosticator here. I'd rather have the market be in balance with fair deals on both sides than a collapse on one side or the other. But I'm a little concerned that we're not going to be in a recovery mode for a little longer than we might have hoped. And I'm saying more than 2 years. I'd love to have your thinking about that, Drew, but I'm a little worried about that. In particular, and then you throw the government on top of it, they're going to right size too, whether it's obviously the state of Illinois being a leader in that.
Right. Well, in any decision, it's a two-step dance. You have tenant and tenant space, and what is that going to look like? And you have base building. And so we provide the base building, and then we can only hope to guess that our base building allows the tenant to do other things that they want to do within their space, collaborative or otherwise. And so all we can do is what is in our control. And Michael and I know that. In our case, we decided to take 3 buildings and upgrade or change or transform, all health and wellness related, to say we're gonna deliver the best base building turnover condition for a tenant to either A, just come back as it was, A, come back and make changes to your space, or B, be a new a prospect that's out there that looks around and says, wow, this building seems to have addressed some of these health and wellness issues that we were nervous about going back to our old building. And so we may choose to come here. But again, all we can do is deliver it to their front door, and then they've got to take it further into their space and do things. But so our biggest thing has been on the air quality, Bob, and kind of the redundant air quality and trying to make it cleaner. And there's been a lot of discussions and articles on that, whether it's UVGA, which is ultraviolet light, or bipolar ionization. Both of them are good solutions. We happen to go with the bipolar. We think it's maybe a little stronger because it ionizes the air and the surface. But also touchless sequences, thinking about how people come in, maybe don't have to push the revolving door, don't have to push the doors, wave your hand, things happen. Obviously, we're all got key cards that make gates go up and call elevators. It's good to have a more efficient elevators that can get you up and down quickly, like destination dispatch, which I have to tell you, pre-COVID, I'm here at 150 Riverside. I was trying to remember over the last year, the amount of times I had more than 4 people in my elevator, just because it's that quick, the way it moves. So that's already was a good thing. So if you can do things that kind of make and cover those bases for the directors of real estate, head of facilities, CFOs, and say, okay, guys, we got a good shell here. Let's now take it further with our space. And in terms of whether it's more collaborative and less the quote sea of cubes, I think is what Salesforce called it in their article. That's all we can do is now wait for them to come in and take advantage of what we've done and complete the picture.
So we are nearing the end of our program, but we have a couple of questions that we wanted to get to. One is First is, what is keeping tenant brokers up at night? This is now for you, Drew.
Go ahead, Lisa.
What's keeping me up at night? You know, I think since I love to talk about
Calls from
strategy.
Drew.
What? Yeah, exactly.
Drew.
Since I love to talk about strategy with clients and sort of figure out what is going to be the best solution for my client, it's all of these pieces we've been talking about today. Is that, you know, what if we can't get back in the office until October? So what if these strategies we're building can't get trial tested until early to mid next year? And so it's probably the timing of the vaccine rollout and how that has an impact on building confidence for people to return to the office. Every time I see another headline about things not happening in the way that they're supposed to, I realize that that's just going to push things further down the road before we're going to be able to be comfortable making decisions. So that's probably my biggest stressor. Plus, I'd love to get the vaccine myself. So that would be, I'd love to have it move forward so I can get it too.
You're not old enough by any stretch, but I am. So just so you know. So I would tell you, I kind of agree with Lisa. I you know, think of the TV show, The Queen's Gambit, right? Which is when she played the multiple chessboards in her high school chess class. And I think today, it's not just the simple kind of transactional side. You're dealing with the psychosis or the psychology of tenants and how to kind of understand, as you said, the strategy, but it's clearly run rate, it's clearly capital management, it's flexibility, but it's also how do we understand to kind of promote the culture that space can provide? And I think those of us, you know, Lisa, myself, and I'm sure a handful of others, think of it in that full solution. So as you think about the chessboard, you've got about 5 other kind of players in that process that you have to think through and solve for. And I think it keeps me up at night, but it also is the thing that wakes me up in the morning, you know, because otherwise I wouldn't be doing it. I'd be out skiing every day, which I wouldn't rather, but seriously, that's the things that keeping me up is the thing that gets me up. And I think that's, having been through a lot of these kind of transitional economies and even work worlds, right, back in the day, I mean, that's kind of the thing that I think we all have to think about. And it's 24/7. I think if you're not thinking about these solutions 24/7, I don't think you're doing your client justice, because they're struggling. They are virtually all of them are struggling one way, shape, or form with this kind of next reentry or new norm. So how can we help them? That's kind of what keeps me up and wakes me up.
Thanks, Steve. Michael, are the concerns the same on the landlord side?
You know, it's, I think Drew said it earlier, and I think it's true. It's what's going to bring the tenants back, right? Like what can we do to help? We all rushed out, you know, April, May, June, and we all came out with, you know, best practices to get back to the office. And we put videos together. Like, we're going to make it, it's not going to be easy, but we're going to make it easier for you to get back. And if you walk into our elevators, here's where you stand and here's what you push and here's the hand sanitizer. And we all went, okay, that didn't work, right? Like, people didn't come back. So it's, what are we not doing that we're going to look back a year from now and wish we had done? And that's what we're spending a lot of time on. So there's the stuff we all, and I think Drew talked about it correctly, you know, it's what's the air quality like and how do we make it easier, touch points and everything else. But I think it's bigger than that. You know, what are the amenities really? What are our tenants? Here's what they wanted before. And so we built a lot of these. And if we have a chance right now to do it at one of our projects, what do we do, right? Like, how do we provide something that a year or two from now, we go, boy, I'm sure glad we did that. Or why'd we do that? Like, where did we put our capital in the right spot? So that's the stuff that is, we're starting to think about it. And again, I think the more we see tenants come back, that it'll become clearer. We're seeing it in Dallas already. So we've got a little, I'm not staying up as much at night about what's going on in Dallas because we see it already. Chicago, I still am. I mean, we don't know. We've got high-rise buildings as well. We got the Chicago Board of Trade building. We spent a bunch of money redoing it. What else do we need to do we didn't do? So that's the kind of stuff that we're thinking about.
I don't know how many, show of hands, how many people did see Queen's Gambit? Good. All right. Well, then you'll know what I do is look up at the ceiling for answers in the middle of the night, which she seemed to do a lot of in her chess moves.
After taking your green pill.
Yeah. My wife's like, what are you doing? I'm like, shh. Coming to me. It's coming to me. I'd like to tell you we're handing out vaccine shots. If you come back to the building, that would be another great marketing coup, but we're not. So, I think the best thing, we can do is deliver what we think is the best product and make the commitment. We've gotten good feedback. Here's what I'll tell you. I think we had made over 250 phone calls in this last 10 months with our existing tenants, right? You reach out, you talk, we're all in the same boat together. I mean, they want to be back, we want them back, but is that the right thing? And we're all kind of searching together. And what we told them about is the things we researched and what we're going to do to the buildings. And we got, obviously thumbs up, kudos. A lot of them are national tenants and that we've gotten rated, at the highest among the country of their buildings that they're in, because a lot of landlords said, we agree with your research, but we don't know if we should spend the money yet. So we're going to just sit and wait and see if this vaccine really kicks in. We won't need to go spend $2 or $3 million on bipolar ionization and, and go, geez, I'm glad we didn't spend that. And that's an approach. That's always an approach. Or you can go do it and say, we did it. We put our money where our mouth is. Come on back when you're ready. And I think we feel better about that approach. And I think our tenants feel that way as well. And hopefully our prospects will. So that's all I can say.
So let's take a positive spin on it now. Where do you see some bright spots in the market?
I'm just looking out the window just to see.
I heard crickets.
I mean, I think, we all talked about this last 11 months. There was the shock factor. There was the early anticipation of re-entering in Q3 of 20. I mean, I think we all thought that was going to happen, right? So we got kind of the double blow of that plus some crazy political crap, which I think gets us kind of skewed anyway. But I think now with maybe a new stable kind of environment after this next week or two, I think that there's a positive light out there. I hope the new president does a great job. I hope and pray that he can pull his rabbit out of his hat and get us in a positive direction going forward across a bunch of fronts. So I think there's a light there. I think that helps all of us, and including Chicago with what Lori is light-footed hopefully will do. And I also think tenants are starting to think about, it looks like the vaccine's going to take, and that we really are considering this reentry in Q3 of 21. So I think there's a political light out there, I hope. And I think there is a light amongst the tenants that says we have to start thinking about how do we solve for this, because they've got to plan capital, right? They've got to invest in this change of space in a hybrid model, potentially, than the sea of cubes, as you said, Drew. And they're going to have to invest some money in that. And they'll probably want to do that while they shrink their footprint to justify at least a neutral run rate impact, to Lisa's point. So I think all these pieces to me are a little bit of a light. And the more we can help them both on the landlord and tenant rep side, I think the better. And those are my two lights.
Very good. Thank you. Well, we've got a couple of questions that came in. So why don't we take a few of those? First is, just got off a well building call. Is the well building designation going to take hold as a confidence builder for back to work? Are landlords thinking about going for it?
I'll just say yes. We've already are getting it for 110 and Union Station. So we believe it's, the next lead, or the designation that you should at least have. You should check the box. Lisa will tell me whether it's relevant or not with certain tenants, and I'm sure it varies, right?
Well, I think the question also is, again, kind of like when LEED came out, there's I think the well-being, there's fit well. Will there be a standard? Like what if any will be the standard? Will one of them become the standard? Will people sort of pursue both? But the idea of a healthy building is clearly feels like it's going to be something going forward. And I agree, Drew, Lisa and Steve are going to be the ones with their clients that tell us how important that is.
think it's going to be a kind of a ticket to entry, you know, whether you have just kind of like how LEED became, whether you have the plaque on the wall or not, there's an expectation that buildings are going to have to be of a certain standard to provide the right environment for tenants.
Thank you. We've got another one. Do you feel the traditional landlord will provide solutions similar to the WeWorks and IWG of the world in the near future?
Drew, you want me to jump in first?
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting because we've been spending a lot of time talking about it. What we're seeing, and we did it in Dallas and we're close on one of our buildings here, to go into more of a management agreement model. So again, we ourselves technically won't be providing those services, but we will through a management agreement. And the position we sort of took, we were not in the WeWork camp. I think Lisa, you and I talked a little bit about this. I was one of those, I'd go to ULI and I was one of those naysayers raising my hand going, I don't get it. It feels a lot like Regis and HQ were. And I was like, people be like, oh, you're the old guy, right? Like, you don't get it. Well, you know, I'm glad we ended up not having WeWorks in any of our buildings, Chicago or Dallas. But I look forward and I think that if we're going to do something, we sort of feel like we'd rather control it. So we're doing it in Dallas with a group down there that in one of our big complexes, and they're going to manage it. We're working with them collaboratively on creating the environment. We're getting feedback from tenant rep brokers down there. And so we're doing it, but we're not doing it, meaning we're not running it. It's a group called the Common Desk. They're one of many, but it's one of the groups we're working with. So we're doing it there and we're looking at it here as well. And that's for us been more of a focus than going to a, you know, another type of WeWork, whoever it is, and just going to them and saying, hey, you want to sign a lease for 10 or 15 years?
I knew when WeWork came and said, hey, we've got this new direction we're heading. It's called longer term leases with quality credit tenants. And I'm like, huh, what a concept. That's what I do. You know, like, that's when I realized, yeah, 3 to 5 year leases with the IBMs of the world. Yeah, that sounds good. Yeah, I think I'll do it. So, you know, we've been open to it. We've been open to it as much as anchor tenants might ask us, hey, are you going to have a co-working group in the building? Because they always love to have expansion that's not part of their fixed expansion, right? It's just when they need it. So I saw that as a benefit from a marketing perspective, that might be interesting to have. More than a floor of it, probably not. And then what we realized when it went from a lease to a management agreement, I go, well, I'm in it anyways now, you know, because when it doesn't work, I'm going to take the space back that I funded. So should we just do it up front and call it a day? I don't think we're quite there yet. We do have spec suites, you know, that's kind of things that landlords do is kind of a intermediary that would be on short-term expansion options for the anchor tenants where we would build out suites, and some are furnished, some are not, but we would do short-term deals. Those still feel okay. You know, the actual co-working, I still think there's some merit to it for bigger users, again, that may need space very quickly for 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, and it may be, you know, 5,000, 10,000. And to have that in the buildings, you know, they think that's an interesting benefit. So, you know, I'm still hanging in there.
Yeah, I can tell you, like Hines has it a white glove through Industrious, so they're kind of trying to see how that plays. And they started it just before COVID, so it's a little tough to figure out. Tishman has their program as well. That's kind of an internal program. I think what's happened, we do a lot of help and behind the scenes with WeWork, including some buyouts of existing leases. So they're trying. I think they have a tough glide path for sure. But the thing that got me interesting is, I know Citigroup went out for a bid for co-working flex, and they hired a retained Notel. Of course, they recently went bankrupt, and then Newmark bought them, right? In some way, shape, or form, they bought them or controlled it. So it'd be interesting to see how a Newmark plays in that game. Maybe it's with their private capital, right, to kind of pull that environment in because of the still unknown. I think to Drew's point and Michael's point, there's going to be a need for this interstitial flex point, as opposed to encumbering a bunch of floors with value implications. How do we kind of partner together with that and have secure infrastructure floor to floor and all that? That's really important. So I think it's out there. I think it's just, we're stuck in this kind of crazy COVID stuff right now. It's going to be probably in the next year before we have a better handle on it. But it'll be interesting to see what Newmark does. I haven't heard anything. Have you guys?
No.
No. I know
All
that.
right.
May I wrap?
We've approached 2 o'clock now and we've just passed it, but on behalf of CoreNet Chicago, thank you all for joining us. And Lisa, if you'd like to finish your comment, you can, and everyone can stay.
Oh, you know what, I was just going to offer that, you know, we're looking at, we have a program called HANA, which is a sort of co-working environment that's a partnership with landlords. And I would agree with everything that they're saying. We're not talking about 10 floors of space, that this is really going to become another sort of amenity feature that landlords will offer to create flexibility for their tenants, I think, in the future.
I want to say thank you to Michael and Steve and Drew and Lisa for spending your time with us today. Appreciate
Thanks,
it.
Bob.
Thank you.
And thank you to CoreNet for having us.
Thank you.
A lot of fun. Hey, everybody stay healthy and get back in the office.
Oh, yeah.
I got through.
I got some room. Come on.
Thank you all. Have a great day.
You guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I got